Let me turning to Revelation 13, be our text for the evening. In studying through the book of Revelation, we have noticed the sevens, especially as they stand out on the page going through. And so tonight we're looking at 7 heads, and we're also going to talk about a beast of blasphemy. In Revelation 12, in our previous lesson, you remember John had seen the sky turn into a battlefield that left the dragon, which stood for the Roman Empire, left the dragon defeated, outraged and even more determined, though, to persecute the woman that was mentioned in that chapter, the woman being the church. And remember, as we study through Revelation, this is highly figurative language, symbolic language, sign language, if you will. And so, in the fact that these things were to shortly come to pass, everything written kind of in between those bookends of that phrase, that all things must shortly come to pass. In Revelation chapter 13, John was on the shore of the Aegean Sea where he saw 2 allies that appeared to help this particular dragon. And the first was a sea beast, and the sea beast had 7 heads, and he had a blasphemous name, in fact. The second is a land beast that facilitated the blasphemy of the first, and so they're working together to help each other to help the dragon. And that's really what chapter 13 seems to unfold. And when you carefully study these particular beasts, the sea beast and the land beast, they will again reveal the fact that God's care for the church has never failed. And He promises to continue to help and to bless the church, and that ultimately there is victory in Christ. And so let's start in chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. On his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And so the sea beast, and we trying to kind of nail down exactly what is this sea beast, or what does it represent. It resembles a dragon. In fact, it resembled the dragon that we read about in chapter 12, in that both were red. Their 7 heads, their 10 horns, or these crowns upon their heads, and so forth. And so, very similarly, you go back to Revelation 12 and verse 3, and you'll find a very similar description. But there was definitely an implied connection between the two, and so much so that you can't hardly think of one without the other, and that'll become more apparent as we go through this. But the second thing we pick up on is the sea beast looked like a leopard. He looked like a bear. He looked like a lion, which would have reminded John's readers of the 4 beasts that are found in Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. And I want us to take a minute. I think we have time. Let's go to Daniel chapter 7. Let's read together. Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my visions by night, and behold, 4 winds, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to it. Suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said, thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion or authority, power, was given to it. And I saw this. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful, terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, verse 8 says, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes, eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth speaking pompous words. And so we have this picture. In fact, in that same chapter, verse 17, those great beasts which are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth. And so the vision that Daniel saw certainly would have been one that John's readers would have been familiar with, thinking about the prophet Daniel, thinking about these 4 beasts that are associated with these kings that were going to rise from the earth, and each one had their own character about them. They had a different look to them, but what we find is that each one of them had great power. And so John's readers is very familiar with these pictures that are given. And again, this figurative language, this sign language that is used, sometimes, very often, is borrowed from our Old Testament prophets, such as Daniel or maybe Isaiah or even Ezekiel. And so you have a connection to that. And so this beast in Revelation 13, in our passage, also symbolized a king, a leader, closely associated then with the Roman Empire. The third thing that we pick up on, this sea beast received his power, his throne, his dominion, his authority from the dragon. In other words, from the Roman Empire. That dragon being shown, we talked about who he was back in chapter 12. And so chapter 13, the latter part of verse 2, talks about that power, that throne, that authority. And so he's gained that authority from someplace, and it's come from the Roman Empire. And so this sea beast had to be referenced to the Roman emperor, who, when John wrote Revelation, would have been Domitian. And Domitian reigned from AD 81 to AD 96. And so we find Domitian being referred to here in this figurative language. But let's notice also the sea beast and his influence. That seems to be pointed out in verses 3 through 5. I saw, Revelation 13, verses 3 to 5, I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. And so they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. And so you can start to pick up on the sea beast and Domitian being here, and think about then his influence. In fact, it's interesting because I think what we find here is an allusion to the Nero myth, Redivisius myth. The fact that Nero, who ruled back in AD 60 all the way up to AD 68, Nero was in power, and actually all the way up to 70. And beginning there, we know his harshness against Christians, his blaming Christians for Jerusalem catching fire when it was actually his fault that those things happened. But when Nero died, he was already taken out of power, and he was going to stand trial. And instead of standing trial, he committed suicide. And so, but it was believed, there was this myth that Nero was going to be reincarnated And so they thought Domitian was the one that seems to fit the bill. He has the same type of character as Nero, and so there's this idea, this myth. And so while Nero had been mortally wounded, he is the one who was thought to be reincarnated as Domitian. And so again, a reference to Domitian in this particular passage. And so this, by the way, this myth, it's interesting. This was a kind of a rabbit hole to go down, but was actually believed and written about in documents all the way up into the 5th century, that somehow Nero was going to be reincarnated. And so there were several along the way that they thought this would be. But certainly, as we're reading this inspired writing, Revelation 13 seems to point to an allusion, at least, to Domitian as the reincarnated Nero. One of the things that is interesting, both of them obviously being emperors, but they were both so despised by their political peers. They were very egotistical in their claims that they were deity, that they were both Lord and God, and hence the blasphemy that they were proclaiming, that they were in fact God. And so, in fact, history tells us that Domitian, in particular, that he was the one who wore that particular name. While Nero kind of started that idea, Domitian took it to a whole new level, so to speak, and commanded by edict, by law, that he would be called Lord and God. The second thing about this beast, he was known for, again, speaking these great things. In other words, these outlandish things and blasphemies, and attempting somewhat to promote this idea of a national religion. He launched this all-out attack, basically, on the church. And so Rome kind of goes on the offensive toward, or at least the emperor does, against the church. And so literally speaking blasphemous things, great and outlandish things. In other words, the word blasphemy simply means speaking something to injure, with the intent to injure someone. And so God's name, Yahweh, as he would have been referred to in the Hebrew Bible, I am that I am, is a phrase that comes up. Exodus 3, verse 14 and 15, God said to Moses, I am who I am, and he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent you, or sent me to you. Moreover, God said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. And you can find it later in reference as well in Exodus chapter 40, 34 and following, where you have that picture. Because in this part of the conversation that's taking place in this passage is the idea of a tabernacle. And so talking about God's tabernacle, and this is a word that's used in the book of Revelation signifying God's presence. Well, they understood that because that's what they find as well in Exodus 40, 34 through 38, when the cloud covered over the tabernacle of meeting and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And so you have then the sea beast, you have him being identified, we can see his influence. Let's get a little bit more into the blasphemy. Verses 6 through 8, then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and to all those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. And so just thinking about that picture that was stated here, you have Domitian and his blasphemous words. First of all, according to verse 1, his blasphemous words that are seen in the fact that he is being called Lord and God. And the second part would be the words that he's speaking against God and God's people and their trust in God. Those who dwell in heaven, even thinking about those who have been martyred, what he was speaking about those who were executed for not giving in and being loyal and faithful unto God, not giving in to this edict to call Domitian by Lord and God. And so we begin to see then his blasphemy unfolding even more. But what about his future? Where is he going? Verses 9 and 10, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword, must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. And so remember, this letter being written to the churches of Asia, this being something that should give them comfort, something that was so important to them, but having to be written in figurative language so that those leaders of Rome and so forth, if they pick it up, it just looks like gibberish to them. It doesn't make any sense. They have no context to make the connections and so forth. And yet, the readers, those early Christians, many of them with a Jewish background especially, would have picked up on those details and those figurative scenes that are given, as well as those beasts and those representing the kings of the earth and so forth, and that power and that authority that was given to them, those wearing those horns, having crowns upon their head and all of that. And so, well, what about the future? Because certainly that's what's important to them, right? How is this all going to play out? What's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to Domitian? What's happening to, he's already talked about, John's already been given the inspiration to write about those martyrs who have already, who were under the altar, remember, crying out, when was God going to avenge their being killed for His sake? And then we see the seals being opened and God taking care of those things. And so that gave us a glimpse into ultimately the future and the fact that God was going to win this battle with Christ. But what about verses 9 and 10? If anyone has an ear to hear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. So who's going into captivity? What does this have to do with it? Who is going to be killed with the sword? Who's trying to use the sword? And then he says this extra sentence that's found in verse 10, here is the patience and faith of the saints. And so we'll come to that last phrase here in just a moment. But the beast that caused untold favor of God's people, all the way back into Daniel chapter 7, did so until the Ancient of Days was mentioned, until the Ancient of Days had come and judgment was made, you remember, in favor of the saints of the Most High. You can go back to Daniel chapter 7, continue reading in there, verses 21 and 22. But even so, all of that, despite the power and the persecution that the sea beast was bringing about here in the book of Revelation, in other words, Domitian, God reminds John's readers that there's one unchangeable fact here. This fact, verse 10, that he who leads into captivity will himself go into captivity. And he who kills with the sword will be killed by the sword. Think about what Jesus said to Peter. Put up your sword. Whoever uses the sword will die by the sword. And so Matthew 26:52. We reap what we sow. And that's a law that is, the law of sowing and reaping is one that is found in every aspect of life. And consequently, the emperor himself was going to falter. He himself was going to fall. And so from that, the persecuted were able to glean the patience, the idea of the ability to remain under the pressure of persecution, to not give in, not give up, but to continue fighting the good fight of faith. And so we find that last phrase, here's the patience and the faith of the saints. That Domitian, the emperor, ultimately is going to get his. God's going to take care of that. And so what were they, the saints, those who would be reading this message first, what were they supposed to gain from that? Patiently endure. have faith, have trust in me. So the second part of this chapter, the last part of it, 11 to 18, deals with the land beast, who himself would be blasphemous in his language, in his words, and things that he spoke. And so the land beast, we find verses 11 and 12 starts, I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And again, that allusion even back to Nero. And so the land beast, similar to the sea beast, in that both were referred to as wild animals, basically, these beasts, horns, and there's this close association. One's authority was given to the other. And so you have ultimately a couple of differences that seem to stand out. The sea beast is Domitian. He has 10 horns, right? The symbol of power. The land beast only has 2 horns. And in fact, somewhat like a lamb. And so not bold and large and big and standing out, but just 2 horns like the shoots of a lamb. And so represented by this particular beast, he's powerful, but not as powerful as the emperor. So what that begins to tell us is that he's probably somebody that's working for the emperor, somebody that's working on behalf of the emperor or the empire in this case. And so the land beast, again, received his authority from the beast. The sea beast, who was Domitian, remember, he had accepted this worship, verses 3 and 4, but he would delegate that authority to the land beast. And what the land beast was in charge of was moving the people to worship. And so these are kind of like the worship directors, so to speak. These were the ones that worked in the concilia. These were the prefectus urbi. These were the ones who served as prefects, who would go about and make sure that everyone was doing their part in worshiping Lord and God Domitian. That was their job. That's what they were sent out to do. And so that's the authority that they were given. That's the particular work that they went about doing. Later, these are ones who are described as the false prophet. This will be found later in chapter 16, verse 13, chapter 19, chapter 20. They're mentioned several times, and so that would be these individuals that we're talking about who make up this land beast. We can see their influence, verses 13 and 14. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. He deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. What's interesting is those of the concilia, these were the individuals who were given the task of making these images. And so that was their particular job. And then you have the prefects who went out and about with authority to make sure that everyone had their idols and would worship Lord God Domitian. And so that was what was going on in the background. And so these, the land beast, verse 13, performed great signs. The word translated signs here refers to something which set an individual apart. And so it was one of John's favorite words for miracles. It set Jesus apart, remember? And so he would use that in that same idea. Those signs prove the deity of Christ. John 20, verses 30 and 31. And so as John continued to study the activity of this land beast, he saw that he was able to make fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he would tell men who dwell on the earth, make this image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. And so you have that allusion yet once again. And so the beast calling fire from heaven is language that's remnant of Elijah calling down fire to consume the offering on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings chapter 18, showing the one true living God. And you have, and it makes sense, this imagery fits well because you have the prefix, if you will, who attempted to consume those who would refuse to worship the emperor. And so they were raining down on those individuals. And so whether it be they were taking their lives or taking property, taking something from them, maybe even taking family members from them during that time. Verse 15 through 17, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He calls us all, both small, great, rich, poor, free, slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And so we see then this mark of the beast coming into play in our conversation here. You have that blasphemy then that was given. Again, the land beasts, they gave breath to the image of the beast. And they did so by enforcing this, by promoting such. They were referred to as false prophets. Later, I've already mentioned in Revelation 16. But second thing, they cooperated in executing as many as who would not bow down to the image of Domitian. It reminds us then of those 3 Hebrew youths that were the friends of Daniel in Daniel chapter 3 who would not bend, bow, or burn. You have the fact that they ultimately, this was kind of ingenious to go about this method to go about and rout out those who were not truly worshiping Domitian as Lord and God. That they had to have this stamp, they had to have this number stamped on them in some way. And so, of course, Christians who refused failed to receive that particular document, and so they didn't have it. They weren't able to buy or sell, and so it basically put them out of business, verse 17. And so this contributed to their poverty. And so if you think about that and what was being thrust upon them, you go back to chapter 6, verses 5 and 6, and you find the state of many of these individuals that they were in such deep poverty because of what was going on here. And so they were identified as enemies of the state, basically. Verse 18, and so we see the future of the land beast. Where was it going for the land beast? Those who were performing, if you will, on behalf of Emperor Domitian, both the prefects and the concilia who were making these images and so forth, and going around and making sure that it was getting done. What's going to happen to them? Here is wisdom, verse 18. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Concerning the number 666, 3 things should be noticed. Number 1, it was a man. And that's something that I believe has to be pointed out. It was a man, and it was a man that they were discussing already. It wasn't somebody yet coming in the future. This is somebody that they were already talking about in both chapter 12 and now chapter 13. This is Domitian. This was the number that was given to him, basically. And so the second thing in the Greek New Testament, man is not being preceded by the definite article. And so it's a general reference to mankind. And so you have the number 666 designed to implicitly prove Domitian is a mere man. He's not a god. He's not to be worshipped. And so this was, again, not just encouragement, but direction for those of patience and faith, as we've already noted in previous verses. And the third thing that we pick up on this is that with 7 symbolizing something that is complete, Revelation 1:4, 4:5, chapter 5, verse 6, 6 then would represent something that was incomplete. And so again, how does he stack up? Both Domitian, the sea beast, the land beast, those who were working for him to facilitate this worship of the beast. Ultimately, this is the work that they were set out to do, and they were mere men and should not be worshipped. And so that's what's pointed out ultimately by that number that was given to show that he's just simply a man. And so it also shows once more, the ultimate failure and fall of Domitian is being predicted here. And so his persecutions, though harsh they may be, are going to ultimately fall short of their design. And so what do we find? What do we learn in all of this? What does chapter 13 mean for us? And what does really chapters 1 to 13 mean for us thus far when we read it today? In John's day, all the world marveled and worshiped Caesar. We could just kind of make a generic statement. That's what's stated there in chapter 13, verse 3 and 4. And everyone, both great and small and rich and poor and free or slave, gave into that ultimately. And everyone from every tribe, tongue, and nation, verse 7, were giving into this worship of Domitian. They were encouraged to do so at their life's behest. And so there was intimidation, there was manipulation, there was isolation. But we go back to Jesus' own teaching. Matthew chapter 7, enter in by the straight gate, wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. Many there be which go in thereat, because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way that leads unto life, and few there be that find it. They may just be a few people who were not bowing down to the emperor, but were only bowing down in following Christ. Compromise would seem like it would be the way to survive here, but the world was at war with the church. That's the picture that we get in chapter 13, chapter 12 as well. And there will be times when we may even feel like we're at war with the world. And there is certainly a spiritual war. And so as soldiers of Christ, we stand, having done all to stand. Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 13. We put on the whole armor of God. And that's what we've been studying throughout this. That's been themed throughout our lessons as we've been studying them in summer, the summer Bible school curriculum. But the idea is that even for us, we have to wear that armor because there is a spiritual warfare that is taking place to keep from compromising our convictions. He says, this is the patience and the faith of saints. This is what we're supposed to do. This is what we are called to do. To be in this battle, to fight in this war. We follow the Word of God as it lights our way, as it directs our path. Psalm 119, 105. Thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against thee. Verse 11 of that same great chapter, Psalm 119. Why do we do that? So that daily we put on that armor, and we step out into the world. We're ready for the battle. We're ready for whatever war comes at us. And we're ready to stand and to fight for the cause of Christ and not to bow down to the world and the ways of the world. And so tonight, hopefully Revelation 13 is something that is encouraging to us as we find certainly some parallels in things that we're facing, things that are going on around us in this world today. This is, we celebrate our independence as a country on the 4th. And I think about those things, and as Ed pointed out, the independence that we enjoy, this independence, this comes from the blessings of Christ. Not just the nation's blessings, but our blessings as a Christian people, as the family of God, the household of God. 1 Timothy 3 and verse 15. And so we count our many blessings. We stand for the cause of Christ. We stand up for what is right, and we will not bow down to the Emperor Domitian, calling him Lord or God, as it references for us, figuratively, the world and the ways of the world and the ways of evil. Tonight, if you have a need, if we can help in some way, please come to the front while we stand and while we sing.